The alien laboratory was colder than deep space and filled with a thin blue fog that rolled across the floor in slow waves as strange machines hummed and blinked in the shadows, and tall figures in pale gray suits moved around without a sound, their long arms reaching over consoles, their eyes fixed on one large screen in the center of the room. On the screen floated a lone, human soldier in the black sea of space, his body turning slowly as distant starlight glimmered off broken armor. His helmet was cracked and frost had formed across the edges of his visor. Thin trails of air escaped from the damaged suit, forming tiny clouds that drifted away into nothingness. The aliens watched without speaking, their minds full of numbers and calculations, and every number said the same thing: the human should already be dead. They had all seen other life forms drift into space, and every time the end came in moments, no oxygen, no pressure, no chance to live, yet this human was still moving, his gloved fingers twitching as if trying to grab something invisible, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. The leader of the scientists, a tall figure with four thin eyes, leaned closer to the monitor. The readings from the human's body made no sense. His heart kept beating strong and slow. His brain still sent electric signals through his nerves, even though by all natural laws it should have stopped long ago. The cold alone should have frozen every cell inside him. The vacuum should have pulled the life out of him, and the leaking air should have ended him in minutes. But here he was, drifting alive. One alien with skin the color of molten silver spoke in a voice almost too quiet to hear, his words shaking with fear. "This should not be possible," he said. "Not even the strongest of our kind could last more than a few breaths out there, yet this creature refuses to end." The leader did not answer. He only tapped long claws against the edge of the console, reading the medical scans again and again. The numbers did not change. Each beat of the human's heart was like a hammer echoing in the minds of the aliens. It was as if the universe itself refused to let this one die. Around the room, the younger scientists whispered to each other, their voices tight with worry. Some said the human must have hidden technology inside his suit, something that could keep him alive. Others argued there was no sign of such a device. The scans showed only flesh, blood, bone, and strange chemistry inside those veins, chemistry unlike anything they had studied before. One small alien at the back remembered an old story told in the training halls, a story about a planet called Earth where the people were said to walk in fire and ice and breathe air that could kill other species, a story where humans were called stubborn survivors who could live in deserts, frozen lands, and poisoned swamps without falling. These were stories told to make young students curious, but never taken as truth. Yet now, looking at the screen, he began to wonder if the old stories were more than tales. The human's head turned slightly, his eyes barely opened behind the cracked visor, and one weak breath fogged the glass. Then another. The aliens felt something inside them tighten, something that was not just fear, but also awe. The leader ordered the room to silence, his voice deep and final. No one would speak again until they had answers. He turned to the bioanalysis station and demanded a full reading of every detail in the human's body. The machines began to hum louder as beams of light scanned every part of the image, breaking it into millions of data points. Numbers streamed down the glowing panels in endless lines and symbols, but each one only deepened the mystery. The more they looked, the more the aliens saw that this human was not just surviving, he was fighting every second. His blood was thickening to hold warmth, his cells were closing against the cold, his muscles were slowing to save strength, his brain was reducing energy use, yet keeping the most important signals alive. Every part of him was adapting in ways the aliens could not understand or match with any known science. One of the younger scientists stepped back from the console, his voice shaking. "If one of them can do this, what happens if many of them can? What happens if we face them?" No one answered because the thought itself was heavy and dangerous. The silence in the room was deeper than the void outside the station. Only the sound of the machines and the steady, slow pulse from the human's heart filled the air. Each beat was like a warning. The leader stared at the human on the screen for a long moment, his mind calculating possibilities and risks, and none of them felt safe. His kind had faced many dangerous species across the stars and had won every war, but this was something different. This was not about weapons or ships. This was about life itself, and a life form that refused to break. The human floated on, still turning slowly in the black sea of space, the crack in his helmet wider. Now, the frost spreading, yet his chest rose again, and his heart sent another impossible beat through the scanners. The silver-skinned alien leaned closer to the leader, his voice low. "We need to find out how before it is too late." The leader gave a slow nod, his four eyes never leaving the screen, and in that moment, every alien in the room felt the same cold that came not from the laboratory, but from the thought that they were looking at something far greater and far more dangerous than they had ever faced before, and they knew that this was only the beginning. The machines kept scanning, the numbers kept flowing, and the human kept living, drifting alone in the endless dark, his body broken, but his will untouched. And as the alien scientists stood in the cold blue light, they felt the weight of the truth settle in their minds, the truth that something about human biology was not just strange, it was something to fear, and it was something that could change the fate of every species in the galaxy. And somewhere far away on the silent, spinning Earth, another human took a breath, without knowing that in a distant place, a room full of alien scientists were watching one of their own kind fight death itself and win. The alien laboratory was silent, except for the low hum of the scanning machines. The blue light from the large monitor still showed the drifting human soldier in the blackness of space, and every alien in the room knew that the next step had to be taken. They had to understand what they were seeing. A command was given, and a retrieval craft left the station, its shape like a long silver needle moving through the void with silent speed. The crew inside did not speak, their eyes fixed on the target ahead, the human body floating slowly through the star-filled darkness. The craft drew close, mechanical arms reached out and caught the drifting figure, gently pulling him inside. The craft's airlock sensor scanned for danger. No alien dared touch him until the machines confirmed he carried no weapon, no active device, only his damaged suit and the strange body inside it. When the airlock closed and the chamber filled with atmosphere, the frost on the suit began to melt. A thin mist rose and curled in the air. The aliens moved him to a sealed medical bay, their long hands working quickly to remove the broken armor piece by piece. The human's face was pale, his lips blue, yet his chest still rose and fell, each breath shallow but steady. The lead scientist leaned over to watch the monitors, his eyes flicking over the endless numbers. The heart rate remained low but strong. The brain activity pulsed in strange patterns, as if shifting between states. The blood pressure seemed to adjust itself each minute, as though reacting to the change in air. They placed the human on a cold table in the center of the lab. A ring of machines lowered from the ceiling, scanning every part of him. Beams of soft green light moved over skin, muscle, bone, and blood, each scan feeding more data into the alien computers, but none of the readings fit their expectations. One alien touched a control panel, and the image of the human's blood cells filled the screen. The cells were unlike anything they had seen. They repaired themselves within seconds of damage. They produced strange proteins that wrapped around foreign particles and broke them down. They even moved faster in colder temperatures, as if the cold itself was a trigger for survival. A second alien ran a chemical test on a drop of human blood, placing it in a container with an alien toxin, a substance that killed nearly every known species in moments. Yet inside the container, the human blood reacted in a different way. It surrounded the toxin, broke it apart, and then adapted to its presence until it no longer had any effect. The young assistant in the corner whispered to himself, "This is not just survival. This is change. This is evolution happening in real time." The leader turned to him and said nothing, but the look in his eyes showed he was thinking the same. They began to test other samples. A small piece of muscle tissue responded to electrical shocks by growing stronger. The strands of hair carried trace minerals that told of a lifetime spent in shifting environments, and strange whether the skin adjusted its own moisture levels when exposed to heat or cold, as if it could decide how to protect itself. The more they tested, the deeper the puzzle grew, and the more fear began to fill the room. For this was not the kind of biology that could be defeated with weapons or controlled with science. It was alive in a way they could not predict. The leader called for the historical database and ordered a search on human survival records. The holographic display filled with images and reports from across centuries of human life. They saw records of humans living in deserts so hot that metal warped in the air. They saw them climbing mountains where the air was too thin to breathe. They saw them sailing oceans of ice, surviving storms that destroyed stronger ships. They saw them walking through lands poisoned by their own wars, yet returning to rebuild. Every record told the same story. No matter the danger, humans adapted, they healed, they returned stronger. The aliens began to understand why their ancestors had once warned them never to provoke Earth. A strange feeling moved through the laboratory, a mix of awe and dread. The silver-skinned alien finally spoke in a voice so low it was almost a hiss. We thought they were fragile, we thought their bodies were weak. But this is not weakness. This is the most dangerous strength of all, the strength to live when life should be impossible. The leader gave no answer. He was focused on one particular reading from the human brain. The patterns of thought activity were shifting between high alert and deep rest, as if the human could sleep and remain aware at the same time. Even in unconsciousness, the brain still searched for threats, still prepared the body for action. Another scientist suggested that they should keep the human sedated for safety. The leader refused. If we sedate him, we will not see the true limits of his biology. He said, we will watch, and we will learn, and then we will decide what to do. But his voice carried a weight that made the others wonder if he already feared what that decision might be. Time passed in the lab, and the human's condition changed in ways none of them could explain. The oxygen level in his blood increased. Without assistance, his body temperature returned to normal. Without heating devices, his pulse grew stronger each hour, as though his body understood it was safe and was repairing itself faster than any known medicine could achieve. One young alien dared to ask the question that many feared: what if this is normal for all of them? What if every human can do this? The leader's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to the main console and began typing a message to the Central Council. In a message, he did not write of fear. He wrote only of data and results, but every number and every image told a story of a species that could outlast any disaster, a species that could take the worst the galaxy had to offer and turn it into a tool for survival. The human lay on the table, eyes still closed, breathing slow and steady, and though the aliens stood around him with all their advanced science, it felt as if they were the ones being studied, as if the human's silent presence was testing them, watching them, waiting for something they could not yet name. The silver-skinned alien stepped closer and stared at the human's face, and for a moment felt something strange, something that made his chest tighten. He could not tell if it was respect or terror. Perhaps it was both. He stepped back slowly and whispered to the leader, "We are not studying an ordinary life form. We are looking at the future of survival, and maybe the future will not belong to us." The leader's hands froze over the console, and his eyes stayed locked on the human. And in that silence, the entire lab seemed to hold its breath, as if the machines, the walls, and even the cold air knew that something important had begun and nothing would be the same again. The alien laboratory was now lit with a deeper blue glow, the light coming from the data screens. As new readings poured in from every scanner in the room, each alien scientist stood in silence as the machines revealed more about the strange human lying on the table, his chest rising in a slow, steady rhythm, his skin still pale, yet warm again. The lead scientist, with 4 narrow eyes, moved closer to the main console and began reviewing the results of the latest tests. The findings made no sense. By every known law of biology, the human should be in a state of complete collapse. Yet the numbers told another story. The body was repairing itself at a speed that the alien medical systems could barely track. The broken tissue in his lungs was knitting together cell by cell. The small internal injuries were fading. The blood was clearing itself of toxins without any assistance. One of the younger scientists, with a smooth green shell covering his head, tapped a display to enlarge an image of the human cells. Under magnification, the sight was unsettling. The cells were not just repairing damage, they were changing shape and structure, adapting to the new environment of the alien station. The membranes thickened, the nuclei shifted their chemical balance, as if preparing for new threats that might come without warning. Another scientist with dark, glassy eyes whispered that this kind of change should take generations, not minutes. No species they had ever studied could alter its own body so quickly, yet here it was happening before their eyes. In the space of a single breath, the human's biology was rewriting itself. The silver-skinned alien stepped forward holding a new set of results. His voice carried a nervous edge. They had tested the human's tolerance to radiation by scanning his body with a mild, harmless wave intended to measure reaction. The reaction was not mild at all. The human cells reacted as if they had been touched by fire, producing protective layers of protein and repairing themselves faster than the scan could finish. It was as if the body recognized danger before danger had even truly arrived. The leader did not respond right away. He was watching the slow rise and fall of the human's chest and thinking about the meaning of these results. There was a danger here, not in the way of claws or weapons, but in the way of survival itself. If this was the natural state of the human race, then no disaster, no enemy, no force in the galaxy could keep them down for long. One alien scientist who had been silent until now finally spoke, his voice trembling. I have read the records of their planet. I know that they have lived through events that should have destroyed them, great waves of fire and stone falling from the sky, endless winters, oceans that swallowed their cities, diseases that swept across their world. And yet they always came back, always rebuilt, always grew stronger. The others turned to him, listening as the weight of his words filled the room. He continued slowly, their own history shows a pattern. Every time they face death, they do not just survive, they change, they become something better than before, and that is why I am afraid. The green-shelled scientist looked down at the human on the table and asked quietly, what happens if they decide to turn this survival ability against others? What happens if their enemies are not disasters, but living species like us? The question hung in the air heavy as stone. The leader said nothing, but every mind in the room turned over the same thought. If humans could adapt to the cold and the heat, to poison and a hunger, to wounds and to radiation, what would they do in a war? The machines continued their endless work, scanning, measuring, recording every change in the human's condition. The blood oxygen levels now matched those of a healthy subject. The brain waves showed increasing activity patterns, shifting from deep recovery into alertness. It was possible the human might wake soon, and no one knew what would happen when he opened his eyes. The silver-skinned alien leaned closer to the leader and said, we should sedate him before that happens. The leader slowly shook his head. If we sedate him, we interfere with the natural process of his recovery, and we lose the chance to see his full capacity. We will keep him here, and we will watch him until we understand. Outside the lab, the vast alien station drifted through space in silent orbit around a dead moon. Inside the lab, the air felt heavy and tense. The younger scientists exchanged uneasy looks, some wishing they could leave the room, but knowing they would never be allowed until the study was complete. The leader accessed the historical files again, pulling up images from the first time their species had encountered humans. Grainy footage showed humans walking away from crashes that destroyed entire ships, carrying wounded companions on their backs, even while injured themselves, surviving on scraps of food and drops of water for days. Without giving up, he switched to another file, showing humans climbing mountains with little protection, crossing icy wastelands with nothing but willpower and stubbornness keeping them alive. The more they saw, the more the fear grew inside them. The silver-skinned alien said in a low voice, they are not the strongest, they are not the fastest, they are not the largest, and yet they may be the most dangerous life form we have ever known, because they do not stop. The leader finally turned from the screen and looked around at the room, his voice steady but grim. You all understand what this means. This is not a single strange human. This is a window into the nature of their entire kind, and we must learn everything before others in the galaxy decide to test them in war. The human stirred slightly, his fingers twitching his head, moving a fraction. The aliens froze, every movement in the room stopping as they watched for signs of waking. The leader motioned for silence. The only sound now was the slow heartbeat echoing from the monitors, each beat a reminder that the impossible was lying right in front of them. The green-shelled alien whispered almost to himself, if this one survives the vacuum of space, what else can they survive? Could they live through the destruction of a planet? Could they live in the heart of star? The others said nothing, but the question took root in their minds. The human's breathing grew stronger, his chest rising higher with each breath, his skin flushing with color. Again, the data on the monitors spiked, showing rapid changes in muscle strength and neural activity. His body was not only healing, it was preparing, as if it knew something was coming. The leader watched every number, every image and felt the same uneasy truth settling deeper into his thoughts. This human was dangerous, not because of any weapon, but because he was alive in a way that defied reason. And if all humans were like this, then no force in the galaxy could ever be certain of victory against them. The human lay motionless on the cold metal table under the soft green glow of the scanners. The air in the alien laboratory felt heavy, as if even the walls were waiting for what would happen next. The lead scientist stood at the head of the table, his four narrow eyes fixed on the data feeds streaming across the monitors. He had made his decision. The time for simple observation was over now. They would test the limits. A sealed container was brought into the room. Inside it swirled a strange liquid glowing faintly in shades of violet and gold. It was known among the alien species as one of the most dangerous substances ever found, a chemical that dissolved living tissue. In seconds, no creature they had studied had ever resisted it. The silver-skinned alien carried the container with extreme care, his long fingers gripping the handles, as if afraid the liquid might sense weakness and strike. The leader ordered a small drop to be drawn from the container and placed on a sterile dish. The liquid shimmered and hissed, faint tendrils of steam curling up into the cold air. Every alien in the room took a step back, though thick barriers of glass separated them from the test area. The leader then ordered a small sample of the human's blood to be mixed with the deadly liquid. At first there was silence, and nothing changed. Then the aliens saw movement. The red cells in the blood twisted and clung together, forming tight clusters. The clusters began to emit a faint glow. The same strange proteins that had appeared in earlier scans now surged through the sample, breaking the chemical into harmless fragments. The deadly violet gold liquid lost its color, its power fading in seconds, until all that remained was a harmless gray sludge. The green-shelled scientist let out a sharp breath, his voice trembling. This is not defense, this is attack. The human blood did not resist, it destroyed. The leader leaned closer to the display, his mind racing. If the blood could adapt to one of the deadliest substances known, then there might be nothing in the galaxy capable of killing a human outright, nothing that could finish them before they found a way to fight back. The thought was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. But the test was far from over. The leader wanted more data. He ordered that a small piece of human muscle tissue be exposed to extreme cold far beyond the freezing point of water. A mechanical arm lowered the tissue into a chamber filled with an icy mist. Sensors tracked every second. The temperature dropped lower and lower until even the alien machines, strained to maintain any other living material, would have frozen solid and shattered. Yet the human tissue flexed and changed inside the chamber. New fibers formed around the edges, tightening like a shield. When the temperature dropped further, the tissue released a faint pulse of heat from within, keeping its core warm enough to survive. The green-shelled scientist stared at the readings, unable to believe what he saw. This is not adaptation over time. This is adaptation in real time. The silver-skinned alien asked the question none of them wanted to answer. How do you defeat something that changes faster than you can attack? The leader ignored the question and ordered the next stage of the test. The human skin sample was placed inside a sealed chamber filled with alien microbes known to destroy other life forms. Within hours, the microbes swarmed over the skin, clinging, feeding, multiplying. The monitors flashed warnings as the colony spread. But then the pattern shifted. The human skin began to release its own chemical barrier, invisible but lethal to the microbes. One by one, they fell apart, their bodies dissolving until the chamber was clear again. The green-shelled scientist whispered, "It does not just adapt, it learns. And once it learns, it wins." The leader kept his eyes on the data. The truth was becoming clearer with every test. This was not just a body that could survive. It was a body that could think in its own way, a body that fought back without orders, without tools, without fear, and that made it more dangerous than any weapon ever built. In the corner of the room, the youngest scientist stood frozen, his mind caught between awe and dread. He had joined a research program, believing humans to be fragile and primitive. He had expected to learn of their weaknesses and how to exploit them. But now he saw that the truth was the opposite. If humans had any weakness, it was hidden far beneath layers of strength that no one in the galaxy had yet fully understood. The leader ordered the final stage of the test. They would see how the human himself reacted to danger, While unconscious, a small device was placed near his head, releasing a burst of low-level radiation enough to trigger a stress response, but not enough to cause permanent harm. The room went silent as the monitors began to spike the human's heart rate, climbed his breathing, deepened his muscles, tensed his brain activity, surged to levels seen only in full consciousness, and yet his eyes remained closed. Then, without warning, his hand twitched, his fingers curling into a fist. The muscle readings jumped higher. His body was preparing to fight. Even in sleep, the alien scientists exchanged uneasy glances. The green-shelled scientist muttered, "If he wakes in this state, none of us may be ready for what happens next." The leader raised a hand for silence and ordered the radiation stopped. The readings slowly began to fall, but the truth could not be erased. They had seen it with their own eyes. This human did not need to think to survive. His body was a weapon all by itself. They backed away from the table, giving the human space, as if afraid that even unconscious he might sense their fear. The silver-skinned alien stepped closer to the leader and said in a voice that barely carried across the cold air, "We have seen enough." But the leader shook his head. "Not yet. We still do not know the true limit, and until we find it, we cannot be sure what we face." The youngest scientist whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe there is no limit. Maybe that is why they are feared." The others heard him, but no one replied. The words hung in the air, heavy as the gravity of a dead star. The human remained still, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the steady beat of his heart, echoing in the monitors like the ticking of some ancient clock, counting down to something none of them could see or stop. And in that cold blue light of the alien laboratory, the scientists understood that they were not testing the human at all. They were testing themselves to see how long they could look at something that defied everything they knew without stepping back in fear. The alien laboratory was quieter than ever, the green and silver lights of the machines casting long shadows across the walls as the scientists stood in small groups, speaking in low voices, their eyes drifting again and again toward the human lying on the table. The leader sat before the largest monitor, his four narrow eyes fixed on a stream of historical files taken from the deepest archives of the galactic network. He had ordered a full search of human history, not just the scientific records, but every fragment of data available, every old report, every recorded battle, every account of disaster and survival. He wanted to know if what they had seen in this single human was an exception or the truth of an entire species, and the answer that came back made his skin grow colder than the air around him. The first file showed a time long before humans had reached the stars, when their planet had been struck by great waves of fire from the sky. The images showed cities vanishing in clouds of dust, oceans, boiling forests turning to ash. The temperature dropped to a deadly freeze. And yet the records showed humans building shelters, hunting food in the ice, and waiting for the world to heal. They did not vanish. They waited, and they returned. Another file opened, showing endless wars fought with weapons that poisoned the very air and water. Humans fought each other for years. Whole regions turned to wasteland, and yet not only did they survive, they found ways to grow crops in poisoned soil, to clean their water, to make medicine from the very plants that had once been deadly. They did not run from the poison. They learned to live beside it until it no longer harmed them. The leader leaned forward as the next set of records appeared, showing images of humans crossing deserts so dry that no other life could be seen for hundreds of miles. They carried water on their backs in small containers, enough for a few days, and stretched it to last weeks, their bodies darkening under the sun, their steps never stopping, even when the sand burned their feet. They found oases where no maps said there was water. They lived where life should not exist. The green-shelled scientist stood beside the leader, reading the files with wide, unblinking eyes. He whispered, "These are not just survivors, these are conquerors of death. Every time the universe tried to erase them, they found a way to stay." The silver-skinned alien joined them and pointed to the next file. This one showed humans in frozen lands where the air itself could freeze skin in seconds. They wore heavy coverings made from the fur of animals. They hunted, they dug shelters into the ice, and built fires for what little fuel they could find. Their children played in the snow, while their elders taught them how to survive. The cold was their enemy, but also their teacher. The leader scrolled through more records, each one darker than the last. One file told of a disease that spread across the planet faster than fire. The infected died in days, yet some humans resisted. Without medicine, their bodies fighting off the sickness alone, and those who survived carried that strength to the next generation. The disease vanished, but the humans remained stronger than before. The young scientist in the corner, who had spoken little since the test, now stepped forward, his voice soft but steady. "I think I understand now. They do not survive despite their weakness. They survive because of it. Their bodies are not perfect. They break, they get sick, they bleed, they hurt. But every time they heal, they become harder to break. The pain teaches them, the danger teaches them, and the memory of every wound is carried in their blood." The room fell silent as his words settled into every mind. The green-shelled scientist looked down at the human on the table, his chest still rising and falling slowly, and he thought of all the dangers this one man had faced before they found him drifting in the void. He wondered how many times this man had already stood at the edge of death and walked back again. The leader opened a final set of files. These were not just about survival, but about what humans did after they survived. They rebuilt their cities. They crossed oceans to explore new lands. They looked at mountains and climbed them. They looked at the stars and decided to reach them. No other species had such a pattern of turning every challenge into a step forward. The silver-skinned alien spoke in a low voice. "This is why they are dangerous, not because they cannot be killed, but because killing them only makes the rest stronger." The leader closed the files and sat back, his four eyes narrowing. He understood now why ancient warnings had been passed through generations of his kind, why old commanders had ordered their fleets never to engage humans unless there was no other choice. He understood why even the most warlike empires had chosen to leave Earth alone. There was no victory to be, yet only delay before the humans returned. The youngest scientist asked quietly, "What if they decide one day that they want more than survival? What if they decide to take what they want from others?" The leader did not answer, but the question hung in the air like a shadow none of them could escape. The human stirred again, his fingers twitching, his breathing deepening, the monitors spiking as his body continued to heal faster than the machines could record. The silver-skinned alien took a step back, as if the man might rise from the table at any moment. The green-shelled scientist swallowed hard. The dark truth they had uncovered was now more than numbers and records. It was lying in front of them, ready to wake. The leader spoke finally, his voice low and sharp. "We cannot let this leave this room. Not yet. If the Council learns the full extent of what we have found, they will panic, and panic will lead to war, and war with humans will lead to something far worse than defeat. It will lead to their evolution." The others nodded slowly, knowing he was right. The human was not just a survivor. He was a seed of something greater, something that could grow into a force the galaxy was not ready to face. They had to decide what to do before he opened his eyes. But as the cold air filled the room and the quiet hum of the machines surrounded them, there was a feeling none of them could shake, the feeling that it was already too late. The alien command chamber was filled with a strange tension as the reports came in from the observation teams. Each update was stranger than the last, and none of the alien scientists could make sense of it. The human subject not only survived, but was moving through environments no other known life form could endure. He had been exposed to temperatures far below freezing, and then moments later to searing heat that should have boiled the liquids inside his body, yet the sensors confirmed his biological readings were still stable and his vital signs strong. Kareth, the lead xenobiologist, leaned closer to the projection that hovered in the center of the room, his scaled hands trembling in disbelief. The footage showed the human forcing open a sealed hatch in the alien test arena, using only his hands and raw strength. The alloy was designed to withstand enormous force, yet it bent and warped under the pressure of human muscles. Kareth's voice cracked as he whispered to his colleagues, "This should be impossible. No known physiology can do this, and yet it is happening right before our eyes." The alien commander Torvak stepped forward, his large shadow falling over the scientist. He had seen many things during his long years in military service, but nothing quite like this. In his mind, the human was not just a subject of study, but a potential threat, one that could not be ignored. He ordered the scientists to increase the range of their tests, to push the human's body to its absolute limits. Kareth hesitated, but obeyed, knowing refusal would only raise more suspicion among the higher command. In the next trial, they placed the human into a sealed chamber filled with a toxic atmosphere so corrosive it could dissolve organic tissue. Within seconds, alien guards monitored the readings, expecting to see the human collapse. Instead, the human coughed, once adjusted his breathing, and then continued to stand upright, his heart rate steady, his eyes alert. The alien observers recoiled in unease. They were looking at a creature that seemed to rewrite the laws of biology. The whispers began to spread through the corridors of the research vessel. Some aliens spoke of ancient myths about predators from beyond their stars. Others feared that if one human could endure such extremes, then entire armies of them would be unstoppable. Kareth, however, was gripped by something different, a deep scientific hunger to understand how such resilience was possible. He ordered detailed scans of every cell, every strand of the human's genetic code. The data that came back was beyond anything he had expected. Human cells showed signs of rapid microregeneration, far faster than the healing rates of any known species. Even minor tissue damage repaired itself in seconds. Muscle fibers realigned under stress, becoming denser and stronger. Bones seemed to grow more resilient after repeated impacts. It was as if the human body adapted in real time to whatever was thrown at it. Kareth stared at the data, feeling a cold realization. This was not just toughness, it was evolution happening in the span of moments. Torvak saw the same reports and felt a darker thought taking root. If humans could adapt so quickly, then conventional weapons might be useless against them. Their weaknesses could vanish within days or even hours. The idea was unacceptable to a warrior who had spent his life maintaining dominance over countless worlds. He gave the order to test the human in combat scenarios, not against machines, but against living alien soldiers. In the combat arena, the humans stood surrounded by towering alien warriors, each armed with shock lances and wearing reinforced armor. The signal was given, and the warriors lunged in, but the human moved with a speed that defied his size, his body twisting and ducking under blows, his hands finding weak points in armor and striking with surgical precision. Each alien who fell looked more shocked than injured, as if they could not believe such force had come from bare human hands. The alien scientists, watching from above, were silent. Kareth's mind raced faster than his heart. He realized that the human was not fighting to kill, but to survive, and even in survival, he was unstoppable. The human adapted to each opponent, learning their patterns, predicting their moves, and countering with frightening accuracy. By the end of the test, every warrior lay on the floor, unable to continue, while the human stood breathing heavily, but still on his feet. The commander clenched his fists and turned away. He had seen enough to know that fear of humans was not only justified, it was necessary. He whispered to Kareth to prepare for the final test, a scenario from which there would be no escape. Kareth wanted to protest, but something in the human's gaze stopped him. It was not defiance, but a strange calm, as if the human somehow knew what was coming and was ready for it. In the preparation chambers, alien technicians adjusted controls on devices meant to simulate the most hostile environments known in the galaxy, regions where no ship could travel without being torn apart by gravitational storms, radiation waves, and electromagnetic chaos. The human was to be placed at the center of this simulation and observed until his body could no longer endure. As the doors closed around the human, the chamber's lights dimmed, and the simulation began. The air shimmered with energy. The walls shook with violent force. The human staggered, but did not fall, his hands gripping the floor, his muscles tensing against invisible pressures. The readings on the monitors climbed higher than the machines had ever recorded, but still the human's vital signs refused to fail. Kareth leaned forward, unable to look away. Part of him wanted to see the limit, the breaking point. Yet another part feared there might be no such point for a human. If that were true, then everything they believed about biology, survival, and war would have to be rewritten. The chamber continued to batter the human with wave after wave of destructive force, but he endured through all of it. When the simulation finally powered down, the human was still there, standing in the center, his body battered, but unbroken, his eyes lifted toward the observation deck, meeting Kareth's gaze through layers of glass and machinery. In that moment, Kareth felt something he could not name, a mix of awe, respect, and dread. Torvak, however, only saw a threat growing stronger with every passing moment. He turned to his officers and in a low voice said, "Prepare the containment measures. This one must never be allowed to return to his kind before we understand the full extent of what he can do." The stars burned cold and bright in the endless dark, and the alien ship moved like a shadow through that void, carrying its strange crew and the human who who had changed everything inside the command hall. The senior alien scientists stood in a tight circle around a large crystal table, their eyes fixed on the glowing hologram that floated above it. The image showed the human soldier standing on the alien world far below. His helmet removed his breath, forming clouds in the frozen air, yet he stood, strong and unshaken, as if the cold could not touch him. They had studied him for days, and every test had broken their understanding of living things. His blood carried strange proteins that rebuilt damaged cells faster than their instruments, could follow his mind, produce signals, even in sleep, as if some hidden part of him never stopped planning, never stopped fighting. Whispers filled the hall as they argued. Some said the human was proof of ancient legends of warriors from the dark edges of the galaxy who could not be killed. Some said he was a threat that must be erased before others like him came. Their leader, a tall alien with pale skin and silver eyes, lifted a hand for silence and spoke in a voice like ice. The galaxy is full of predators, yet none like this. He said this human was wounded beyond repair, yet he heals. This human was left to die in the cold, yet he lives. We must understand if this is the nature of all his kind, or if he is something even rarer. The leader's words sank deep into the minds of the scientists. Far below on the frozen world, the human was not thinking of the debates above. He was thinking of the voices he had heard over the comms before they cut his suit feed, voices filled with shock and fear. The aliens had expected him to die, but something inside him refused. He had felt the bite of vacuum. He had felt the cold like knives against his skin, yet his body had fought back. His mind had screamed to move, to breathe, to survive. And so he had. Now he was watched by alien drones that floated like dark birds in the sky above. He could feel their eyes on him, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the distant shapes of mountains that rose like black teeth on the horizon. Something called him, their feeling in his bones like instinct. In the alien ship, the scientists watched him walk across the snow, his steps sure and steady, even as storms whipped around him. They measured the drop in temperature, the lack of oxygen, the pressure that would crush most life forms. Yet he kept moving, and his core body heat remained high. One scientist hissed in disbelief, saying it is as if the universe bends its rules for him. Another shook his head, saying no, it is as if his kind were made for war with the universe itself. The leader turned to them and said, "Prepare the lab. We will bring him in, and we will learn the truth." But the human had his own plans. As he climbed the frozen slope, his eyes caught the faint glint of something buried under the ice. He knelt and brushed away the frost, revealing strange metal covered in markings that glowed faint blue at his touch. The markings pulsed like a heartbeat, and the ground trembled far above. The scientists saw the readings. Spike alarms flashed across their monitors. The leader stared at the data, and his silver eyes widened. "He is waking it," he whispered, and the others leaned closer. "What is he waking?" one asked, but before an answer came, the image on the hologram shifted. The eyes split apart, and light burst from the ground, throwing the human back. Yet, even as he tumbled through the snow, he rolled to his feet, his face hard, his eyes locked on the rising shape from the crack in the earth. It was not a machine, and not a creature, but something between vast and ancient, covered in the same glowing markings. Its voice was a deep rumble that shook the sky. It spoke in a language unknown, yet the human seemed to understand. His posture shifted, his jaw set, and he answered in words the ship's translators could not catch. The alien leader leaned close to the image, his voice trembling. "What is he saying?" he demanded, but no one could answer. The giant shape bent toward the human, its massive eyes glowing like suns. And for a moment, the storm stopped. The snow hung in the air. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then the giant stepped back and sank into the ice, leaving only the faint blue glow that pulsed for a moment before fading. The human stood alone in the silence, breathing slow and deep. The drone circled, but did not approach. The scientists above were in chaos. Some shouted that the human had just communicated with a myth. Others demanded the ship leave before the world itself turned against them. The leader said nothing, his gaze fixed on the human below. Slowly, the human began to walk back toward the landing site, his pace calm as if nothing had happened, but his eyes were different, colder and sharper. When he reached the point where the drones hovered, he stopped and looked directly at them, as if staring into the eyes of the scientists themselves. Then he spoke, and this time the translators caught every word. "Tell your people," he said, "that we are not to be feared, but neither are we to be tested." The drones recorded every syllable and sent it to the ship. The leader heard it, and felt the weight of the warning. The ship descended to collect him, the ramp opening like a mouth of metal. The humans stepped inside without resistance, and the doors closed behind him. The scientists kept their distance, feeling something in the air like static. Their instruments showed his body was unchanged, yet every instinct told them something had shifted. The leader approached slowly and asked, "What did it say to you?" The human looked at him for a long moment, and then replied, "It told me that my kind are not alone and that some things in this galaxy are older than fear itself." The words hung in the air like a shadow. The ship rose from a frozen world, carrying its strange passenger away. But the fear in the hearts of the alien scientists did not fade, for they had seen the human survive the impossible, speak with the unknown, and walk away untouched, and they knew deep down that if all humans were like him, then the galaxy would never be the same again, and somewhere beyond the edge of their maps, something ancient had just awakened.